Hi, I'm going to try to demonstrate the saucer poster project in two steps. Step 1, Phase 1, Part 1 is going to be building the Animator file and building a JPEG out of that, and the second part will be going into Photoshop Elements 8, and we'll try to composite the images together and make it look more realistic. So here we go. We're trying to create something that takes you and puts you in front of your saucer, and the instructions are all there step by step. Starts with the photo and then into a little bit of Photoshop and cropping, and then we're going to spend most of our time in Animator. So here it goes. First off, I've already got a photo in here somewhere. My original photo looked like this. Oh yeah, there it is. Just a picture in the shop with the character facing, the subject facing the camera. The resolution of this is nice and big, at least 8 megapixels, so it's going to be poster sized. And I'm going to start in Photoshop with this and get that file in there, because the first thing that you have to do is you have to crop it to the right dimensions. So I'm going to use the cropping tool, and I'm going to put in a width of 3400 pixels and a height of 2200 pixels with a px at the end of it. And that should allow you to draw and compose a shot that's going to look good as a poster picture. So I'll take this thing and I'm going to kind of get rid of little bits and pieces of it and try to frame it so it's going to draw the focus where we want it. I'm going to put the saucer right about there. If I double click it, the image stays about the same size on the screen, and that suggests to me we had lots of resolution, because this is a really big high-res picture. And now it's just about ready to go, but first things first, I'm going to use a file. I'm going to use a save as, or better yet, file save for web. I'm going to save it as a JPEG in high quality, because this is going to be the background image we'll use in Animator. I'll say OK, and I'm going to name it with an appropriate background. And I've got a couple of versions of this already. I'm going to call this cropped BG. I'm going to call it cropped BG 2019 and save it. We're done with Photoshop for now. We'll be coming back to it in the next part. But the next thing we have to do is we have to bring up some Animator and start using that image that we just made. So here's where Animator starts. Normally you're dealing with an object, and this is the saucer that I'm going to try to superimpose into this. We're going to go into scene mode. You can either click it there, or you can go to File, or excuse me, Mode and Scene, and make yourself a new scene. And when you make a new scene, I'm going to start from scratch here. I'm going to call this Poster 2019. And there's a couple of things that we want to change right off the bat before we even leave this dialog, besides the name. First of all, hit the movie image. And the movie image that we want to use usually defaults to 400 by 300, but we want to use something more specific. We're making this a 17 by 11 inch poster. So go down to aspect ratio and tell it you want to use something that is going to have a 17 unit width and an 11 unit height. And when you do that, you can go back up to the image size at the top just to confirm it and type in 3400 pixels, and the height will automatically adjust to the 22. So you know you're working with the right aspect ratio. That's the shape of the rectangle that we're looking through. When we look through the lens, we're seeing that shape in this green box around the outside. The next thing we might as well do while we're here is hit the environment. And the environment that it defaults to is just a solid gray background, but we want to do something a little more fancy. So we're going to use Image and go to the file and specifically load up that image that we just made, the cropped 2019 version in this case. I'll load it up and say OK. And now I can say OK here. Now normally you don't see it at all. Normally you'll see something that looks like this and nothing seems to have changed. But we have to go to the view from the camera. And I use the 1 button on the numeric keypad. You can also go this way and say, okay, I'd like to use the camera view. And then you can see your image pop into place. And it should be exactly the right aspect ratio for 11 by 17. You'll also notice you start with a ground grid. So we've got to manipulate that a little bit. And this is the next big step that we want to do to make this thing work just about right. Widen this off a little bit. We want to go into quad view. We want to use that ground grid to try to match the angle of our virtual camera with the angle of the real camera. So I like to double click that camera and just reset its angle so it's looking at an orientation of 0, whatever, and 0. In fact, if we wanted to make this really standard, we could say 0, 180, and 0. Click it, and you can see from our quad view, if you're looking from the front and the top and the right and the camera, you can see that the camera, the little virtual camera that's there, is pointing straight up and down. If I click it, you can see where it's looking. And I like to try to make this room sort of match the room in the picture a little bit. So if this was the room I was at, that camera is not looking straight ahead. I'm going to use the M key and move the camera a little bit over first of all. But I'm going to hit R for rotate. You can use the rotate button there too. And the right mouse button, not the left. Use the right mouse button and I'm going to rotate this thing over till it looks like the corners sort of match and the angles sort of match. So in the picture, that camera was actually, angled over a whole lot, looking like something like this. It was probably a whole lot higher off the ground too, so I'm going to go to this view and I'm going to move it off the ground, and I can sort of see the floor showing up here. And if you work this thing a little bit, you should be able to get those angles to match, so it sort of rides along the dimensions that you see here, favoring the perspective that you're looking at. Looks like I might have to rotate the camera down a little bit. Yeah, something like that. And it doesn't have to match up exactly for the movement, but, I'll try to move it in here a little bit. So, that's sort of emulating the angle that the camera was really at and the direction it was looking. Now, I'm done with the ground grid, so I'm going to go back to the scene, the properties, and I'm going to turn off the ground grid. Wherever that is, there it is down at the bottom. Say OK and OK. So I just have my scene, I have my background, got the picture. Time to build in the saucer. So I'll hit build and add object. Find my saucer in there. For some reason I called it printable. And now as I put this thing in there, you can see it from the 4 views. First off, I'm going to move it higher up in the air because it's floating. And I think I'll rotate it so it faces the character. And this is the beautiful thing about getting all these things matching. When you start moving it around a little bit, I'll hit M for move. You can see that if you move it further away from the camera, it goes back in perspective. Or if it comes towards the camera, it gets bigger. So you want to sort of figure out, emulate where this thing would normally be. And I'm going to think, I think it would be about here, but it's kind of small. So I'll scale it up in size too. Make it nice and huge like that. And I want to position this so that it's going to be behind the subject, that the arm here is going to sort of cover it over a little bit. Something like that. Maybe I even want to scale it up so it's a little bit bigger. Move it back a little bit. I'm just scaling and moving so I can frame and compose a decent picture right about here. And I think I've pretty much got it there. Maybe I'll rotate it back a little bit. You can see a little bit more of it. It looks like it's aimed at the character. And that should pretty much do it. I think I'll be happy with that. So the next phase that we want to do is match the lighting that's in our virtual studio with the photo that was taken. And I'm going to play around a little here with the lighting. First of all, I'm going to hit the F key so everything sort of fits the frames a little bit better. Don't worry that this thing shrinks down. It'll come back in a sec. So to add some lights to this, I'm going to go, say, to the front view here, build. I'm going to add a light. Now, the lights that we have in here are shop lights. They're sort of fluorescents. I'm going to crank up the brightness of them first. And I'm going to choose a property that emulates a local light. That means it's kind of like a light bulb. Depending where you put it, it's going to have a big effect on what gets illuminated on the saucer. So I'll start with one and then start moving it. So if I move it down, clearly it's going to illuminate underneath. There were lights above. So the higher up they go, the more of the saucer they illuminate like this. I'll hit F again and I'm going to move it a little bit. You can see it resets the camera. So it looks to me like the fluorescent lights, if I were to figure out where they were, they look like they're behind the subject here a little bit. Sort of more over here. Sort of off the shoulder, a little bit like that. And I know there's one that's sort of behind me, and I think there was a series of these things. So I'm going to start with one there that sort of emulates the light on the shoulder here, on the shoulder of the saucer. I could sort of match that up. Looking good. But I know there was one behind here as well. So I'm going to go build, add another light. Same thing, I'm going to make sure it's a local light and that the brightness is about the same. Say OK. I don't have to name it, but I'm going to put it sort of in the same thing here, about the same height from the front view. From the right view, it should probably be in line with it, so I'll put it over here. And maybe I'll move it a little bit further back like this, so it just sort of illuminates the back side of it, like that. And hopefully this is going to make this thing look like it blends in here a little bit better, putting shadows where we want them. And speaking of shadows, that's the next thing that maybe we should do with this. it would be nice if we could cast shadows with these bulbs. So I'm going to double click each bulb, go into its advanced properties, and ask it to cast a shadow. Now it's casting a pretty deep shadow, 70% dark. I'll make it 50. I think that's a little bit lighter. Do the same thing with the other bulb over here. And advanced, cast a shadow, it'll be 50. Because there's no really dark shadows in here. And finally, the saucer itself, if we want it to accept and cast shadows, I'll double click it and tell it it's going to cast and receive shadows even on itself. So now we have kind of the lighting's all in place. We've set up our stage. This is going the right direction, but let's check it out and see how it's really looking when we render it. This is the rough version of it. If we go render, render image, I'm going to render a quick version of it, not the full 34 by 22. I'm going to cut that down to 850 by 550, same proportions. I'll do it anti-aliased and see what it looks like. It'll take its time because it's painting shadows, so this can be really slow. If you turn off anti-aliased, it'll go way faster. And there we have the finished version of it. And you can see the lights are kind of emulating where they'd be in these shops. We can see underneath here, but shadows are cast where they should be, I hope. And it looks like this is going to be a pretty decent composition, and it's going to look fairly realistic in there. So this is pretty much done. I've just taken a first bash at this. Sometimes you can spend more time fixing it up. I'm going to save this image. Oh, but before I do, this is a low res image of it, 850 by 550. I want to go back under image, and I'm going to get the full blown one now, 3400 by 2200. As long as I'm satisfied with what this is looking like. Anti-alias is turned on, and now it's going to take a few minutes to generate this, but I'll fast forward to the end. Okay, so it's finally rendered this picture, and it took a long time because I had 2 light bulbs and lots of shadows. And you'll notice that it doesn't fit in the frame because it's so high in resolution that you're not going to see the whole picture, but you can scroll around it if you want. But here's what you have to do next. Make sure you go to Save. Hit the Save button, choose the appropriate location for it, which should be in your class folder. I got mine in 3D modeling and poster, and I'm going to save it in there. Now, the format that it's going to save it at, if you don't change it up front, you have to go and specify it's a JPEG that you want to save. Give it an appropriate name. May 2019. I'm going to call this Merged Poster. And save it. And I'm going to specify that this is a JPEG, that it's going to be the highest quality I can get, 100, not 1000, RGB, and I'm going to leave pixels per inch free, it doesn't matter. Say OK, and now it's saved the image. And I'm going to hit close at this point in time. So I'm going to leave Animator for now and go on to the next phase, which is to go and put it into Photoshop. And we will finish the composite there. See you there.